Good evening, good evening. My name is Tamara Terry, and I am the president of WomenNC. I also work for RTI International. I've worked there for 20 years. I'm a research survey scientist, and I also support our equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging work as the domestic outreach chair. I'm responsible for outreach in the DE&I space at RTI. I am so excited and elated to see everyone that has joined us today because it ultimately speaks to your commitment to change and the evolution of women. Welcome to our local to global forum, where WomenNC scholars will embrace equity through their research to improve the lives of North Carolina women and girls. I would love for our scholars to just stand up and just wave their hands to our crowd. WomenNC's Leadership Scholar Program trains college and university students to engage in rigorous research, public policy, formulation, and advocacy to improve the lives of women and girls across the state. We are dedicated to advancing gender equity in North Carolina by facilitating discussions with thought leaders and advocates, informing and educating the community on issues that concern. Our 2023 scholars have worked extremely hard over the last 8 months to craft their own research project that not only explores instances of gender disparity, but also provides recommendations to improve the status quo, ensuring engaged research projects with practical purpose. Myself, the WomenNC staff, and our board of directors are so very proud of our scholars, and we look forward to seeing their future endeavors. So who's ready to hear from our amazing scholars? It's where you all say, yeah. All right, so without further ado, we're going to invite our first scholar to present.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shreya Kancharla. I'm a junior majoring in political science at North Carolina State University. Thank you, WomenNC, and my mentor, Punitive. My research pertains to improving the intimate partner violence, or IPV services, available to the South Asian community in Wake County, North Carolina. This is Sonia Khan. Sonia Khan was a Pakistani woman, social worker, and an advocate for low-income families. He also had a passion for women's rights and worked to remove the stigma of divorce in South Asian communities, predominantly through social media platforms such as TikTok. Khan explained the shame and stigma she faced as a divorced South Asian woman. Because of her divorce, she was exiled by some of her family members for her actions. Unfortunately, on July 18, 2022, she was shot dead by her ex-husband, Raheel Ahmad. The news of Khan's death shocked the South Asian community and her TikTok followers. These events ignited conversations surrounding the stigma of divorce and domestic violence in the South Asian community. As we saw with Sonia Khan's story, the South Asian community faced various cultural barriers, including abuse from other family members, stigma or shame, isolation, fear of divorce, and more. Additionally, South Asian culture is considered patriarchal, adhering to traditional gender roles in which men are seen as the primary decision makers and have much greater power than women. This graph displays the results of a study focusing on the indirect experiences of domestic violence among South Asian immigrants in the United States, featuring both men and women. And it shows how prevalent domestic violence is in the South Asian community, with physical being the highest type of abuse. Domestic violence is prevalent in Wake County, shown in the most recent report detailing the number of clients, Interact, a nonprofit that assists victims of domestic violence and sexual assault at Wake County. Interact served 5,739 clients from July 2020 to June 2021. Despite Interact not reporting the race of all of their clients, historically, South Asian women are less likely than women of other races to seek out services due to a lack of social support, according to a study conducted by researchers Mahapatra and Ryan. Karen is the only organization in Wake County that provides services and assistance for South Asian women. Karen's mission is to break the cycle of abuse by providing culturally focused services and extensive economic, social, and community resources to serve South Asians who are victims of domestic violence in North Carolina. Karen has significant outreach, with the entity serving 367 clients from Wake County in 2020 and 541 in 2021. Despite this effort, with Wake County having one of the biggest South Asian populations in North Carolina, Karen's outreach might be improved if they had bigger resources. My research explored how services for South Asian women in Wake County who have experienced intimate partner violence can be improved. I conducted research for this study through a literature review by using systematic wordsmithing. I also carried out informational interviews with different South Asian domestic violence prevention organizations. I then offer recommendations that have the potential to improve the services provided to South Asian victims or survivors of IPV. From my literature review, I discovered that many South Asian victims or survivors of IPV are not aware of the resources available to them. And the outreach coordinator of Karen expressed this to me as well, because many of Karen's clients had wished they had heard about the organization sooner. One study I reviewed detailed the impact of technology and suggested that domestic violence service providers should promote the safe use of technology for victims or survivors of abuse. This can increase their ability to assist themselves and their children using information technology. As technology expands social networks, allows victims to seek outside help, and eventually allows them to leave their abusive relationship. The same study further explains that outreach can be accomplished by placing information about domestic violence in culturally specific locations that are frequently visited by the South Asian community, such as grocery stores or places of worship. This all adds up to the importance that bystander training and education on healthy relationships can have for victims or survivors. On that note, another key finding is that religious organizations continue to be perceived as unhelpful, supporting South Asian victims or survivors of IPV, because many view domestic violence as a private issue that needs to be dealt with behind closed doors. However, religious organizations can do quite a lot to assist victims or survivors of IPV. For my research, I spoke with the Director of Outreach and Education of DAIA, a South Asian-specific domestic violence prevention organization in Houston, Texas. The Director of Outreach and Education directed me towards two resources that focus on supporting faith leaders to prevent sexual and domestic violence. These include the Faith Trust Institute and a domestic violence guidebook for faith leaders from New York. These resources explain that religious organizations can aid victims or survivors of IPV by sponsoring educational events about domestic and sexual violence, speaking out about domestic violence during meetings or sermons, and so much more. Providing all these resources can improve the safety of religious organizations for victims or survivors who are deeply connected to faith or religion. I have two recommendations based on my research. First, South Asian religious organizations in Wake County should be encouraged to host educational events focused on domestic violence, healthy relationship dynamics, and bystander training. An educational event informing others about domestic violence and what a healthy relationship looks like is an opportunity to encourage bystanders to look for signs of a potentially abusive relationship and understand how to properly help those who may be suffering at the hands of an unhealthy relationship. We should also request local South Asian-owned, women-run beauty parlors or threading salons share information about community resources with their clientele. As many South Asian women visit these salons, it would be beneficial to South Asian victims of IPV for these salons to display brochures or flyers with the resources available to them. All in all, pushing forth bystander intervention and prevention methods will garner greater comfort and support for South Asian victims or survivors of IPV, giving them the courage to leave an abusive relationship. With the large South Asian population that exists in Wake County, it is not enough to people from different racial backgrounds live under more strenuous circumstances than others. It can be seen in the South Asian community alone. Community-based outreach and cultural responsiveness are efficient ways to help people of different racial and cultural backgrounds. change can happen with the right initiative. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Allison Riley, and I'm a junior studying political science at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Tonight, I will be presenting my research on the restorative justice in North Carolina schools, with a particular focus on how anti-racist restorative practices can help to build community and support Black girls in North Carolina. Before I get started, I just want to take this time to thank WomenNC, as well as my mentor, Brittany Howard, for being so supportive throughout the research process and for giving me the opportunity to speak to you all. So to begin, I wanted to give a quick overview of my research process. I began by taking a deep dive into existing practices here in North Carolina with an intentionally intersectional approach to the gender and racial-based disparities that exist in the existing system. Then I engaged in a literature review, looking at some existing restorative justice initiatives that are taking place in schools across the United States. I then identified 4 common barriers that are limiting positive impacts that restorative justice can and should be having in these schools. And finally, I came up with 4 recommendations that will help to expand and improve the use of restorative justice in schools here in Durham County, North Carolina, and beyond. So to begin, let's define the problem. During the 2017 to 2018 academic year, students in North Carolina public schools lost over 40,000 days of classroom instruction due to short-term suspension. While that lost classroom time alone is a problem, even worse is what comes after. Exclusionary discipline processes like suspensions and expulsions have been linked to several negative life outcomes, including poor attendance, reduced academic achievement, failure to graduate, increased juvenile justice involvement, and higher rates of adult incarceration. This funneling of students from classrooms into the criminal legal system has been commonly known as the school prison pipeline. It's a significant issue here in North Carolina. What's more is that with a more intentional look at the intersectional experiences of students in North Carolina, it becomes clear that the experience in North Carolina, the school prison pipeline, is not felt equally among students. Although most research advocacy around the school prison pipeline tends to focus on boys of color, the fact of the matter is that Black girls are actually the fastest growing population in the juvenile justice. If you look at this figure here, you see that Black boys experience suspensions at rates 3 times more than their white counterparts, whereas Black girls experience suspensions 6 times more often than their white peers. So an important focus of my research is to fill some of the gaps in the existing research and advocacy around school pipeline and propose restorative practices as a specific way to shift the framework of existing discipline to something that can be more inclusive and uplifting of all girls in schools, as well as focus on girls. So what really is restorative justice? I've had the privilege in my own education and research to participate in restorative practices, and I think what's been the most powerful part is that it's not just a series of practices or a checklist of items, but it's actually a really transformative framework. It's based in a lot of Indigenous history here in North America, as well as Australia and New Zealand. And that transformative framework, it really prioritizes relationships, independency, fairness, shared decision-making, solidarity, and healing. I think one of the best ways to kind of explain that transformative shift is to look at these questions and the different approaches that punitive discipline versus a restorative justice approach would take when responding to conflict and harm. In a more traditional punitive discipline system, the question asked is what rule or law has been broken, who broke it, and how should they be punished? In a restorative justice framework, however, the approach is much more holistic and community-centered. The questions are who has been harmed, what are their needs, and how can that harm be both be repaired and then prevented from occurring again in the future? In the school context, some of the most common approaches to restorative practices include restorative conversation, circle processes, and restorative conferences, which I'd be happy to go into more detail of in a different conversation or in the Q&A later. So for my research methods, I engaged in an action-oriented literature review. I used search terms that became increasingly specific to ensure that I was making that intersectional approach to research. I searched 2 education-focused databases and found 25 articles that I reviewed. And based on my review of those existing school-based restorative justice initiatives, I found a really strong case for the use of RJ in schools. Some of the positive outcomes that I found in my research include reductions in office discipline referrals, suspensions, and expulsions, building listening, anger management, and empathetic skills, improved social relationships with both peers and teachers, increased attendance and graduation rates, and in many cases, there was a demonstrated opportunity to address both racial and gender-based gaps in school. However, I do also want to mention that there were some studies in my literature review during which there were not the positive outcomes that could be achieved because of the restorative justice. In fact, there were others where some of those existing discipline gaps were actually exacerbated because RJ wasn't being implemented as effectively as. So because of that, I identified these 4 barriers to effective RJ implementation that were common themes across the literature I reviewed. The first being identity-blind restorative justice. In several of the studies I read, there were reports of restorative practices being implemented using either race-neutral or colorblind language or broadly identity-blind language that wasn't really doing the work that it needed to do to interrogate some of the structural racism and sexism that is embedded in those previous systems. And so it wasn't equipping teachers and administrators to address their implicit biases and apply restorative practices in a way that is inclusive. Another common barrier that was mentioned in the literature was this distinction between procedural and wide restorative justice. There were some implementations that were kind of implemented more as a checklist of items rather than that school-wide cultural shift that is really essential to a restorative justice framework. Other studies cited teacher and administrator buy-in as sometimes being a barrier. Teachers in America, as you know, are already severely underpaid and overworked, and sometimes the thought of taking on a new training and implementing something new can be a barrier. I do have some suggestions on something that. Then lastly, lack of funding, sometimes to hire a restorative practice coordinator or to pay for the materials for training. So with those barriers in mind, I established 4 different recommendations that I think would be great both here in North Carolina and across the U.S. as ways to expand and improve on existing school-based restorative justice initiatives. The first being that restorative practices really need to be paired with anti-racism and anti-bias training to ensure that restorative practices aren't identity blind, but are identity aware and are being used to address the unique experiences of students of all identities. Next, I recommend that community building restorative circles be used, both in student orientation as well as professional development at the beginning of the year as a way to kind of proactively introduce restorative practices to folks and build that buy-in. For me, I think what has made me so passionate about restorative justice is that I've been able to participate in it. I've been harmed or I've harmed others, and like to experience how powerful that is. I think it's really important for building that buy-in. Third, I identified a few grants that provide opportunities for teachers in North Carolina to apply to get that restorative training. And finally, I've made some recommendations for further data collection to ensure that the programs are constantly being evaluated and reevaluated to make sure they're reaching their intended impacts. The last thing I want to highlight before I finish up is in some of my conversations during my research process, I actually spoke in Durham Public Schools and learned that in the last couple of years, they have transitioned their prior in-school suspension programs to these restorative practice centers. So that's just to highlight one county in North Carolina that is starting to make that shift from more punitive discipline to restorative practices. And I'm really hoping to continue to connect with them and see how my research can help to. Thank you all for your time and listening. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to contact me. Thank you much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Carolina Koch. I am a senior at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. I'm studying economics and public policy, and I'd like to thank you all for joining today's discussion. With a special thank you to WomenNC for hosting us, and also to my son for Ana Perez that couldn't be here, but was through my research. So today I'm going to be speaking on farm worker protection through sustainable agricultural practices, with a specific focus on prioritizing sustainable practices to protect North Carolina's most vulnerable populations. So an overview of my literature review methodology. The first step was to formulate a research question, which is how can sustainable agricultural practices improve the working conditions of female migrant farm workers. The next step in this process was to search the literature and screen for inclusion. So this included focusing on peer-reviewed articles in journals with gray or non-traditional literature, including government documents and databases like the US labor, and then also key terms and Boolean operators were used to refine search. Next step was to assess, analyze, and synthesize data. So data pertaining to the intersection of these identified themes, so that includes agriculture, female migrant workers, and working conditions. That was all extracted. And lastly, is why I'm here today, which is to report on these findings and then also propose recommendations for this policy arena. So in this presentation today, I will be discussing my research in relation to 3 main sustainable development goals as defined by the United Nations. Number 5, gender equality. Number 8, decent work and economic growth. And number 13, climate action. So as we begin to address some of these issues, I'd like to draw attention to 2 significant statistics in North Carolina. The first being that $92 billion of value added to North Carolina's economy came from agriculture and agribusiness. That accounts for 17% of jobs in North Carolina. The second being that North Carolina ranks 6th in the nation in the number of migrant farmers. So that has over 150,000 migrant workers present in North Carolina each growing season, with 95% of these migrant workers being native Spanish. So we know that the state is highly reliant on migrant labor, the vast majority of whom are of Latinx descent. And this disproportionate demographic landscape has opened grounds for exploitation due to a variety of factors that not throughout the presentation. So essentially, what's the issue? In North Carolina, an economy highly reliant on its agriculture industry, the mass production and processing of food, and other agricultural products utilizing harmful pesticides and other harmful fertilizers has left the state to cope with the effects of non-renewable fossil fuels and other harmful side effects. So while the agriculture industry has taken a toll on the environment, its adverse effects are also disproportionately harming the laborers that are upholding our. So agriculture workers in North Carolina are facing both health and economic barriers. Health barriers include musculoskeletal and eye damage, pesticide exposure, heat illness, and illness. Economic barriers include lack of legal protections, risk of deportation, low wages, and poverty. So why is this a gendered issue? There's a disproportionate impact on women. Women working in the agriculture industry face a number of risks that can compromise both their physical health, but particularly their reproductive health. One of these risks includes exposure to pesticides, which can occur through inhalation, thermal or ocular contact, or ingestion. Pesticide exposure is strongly associated with negative health outcomes among adult women, but also developmental outcomes among children. These long-term exposures to pesticides can lead to neurocognitive decline, pulmonary disease, cancer, and reproductive problems. A study conducted from 1998 to 2007, examining pesticide-related illnesses and injuries in farm workers, found that female farm workers are twice as likely to experience an exposure-related illness than men. So given all of these issues, what are some proposed recommendations that we can take into this policy here? So the first thing that I suggest is a participatory approach and instituting an accountability approach in farm worker regulations. That means introducing an accountability approach amongst farm owners and farm workers to close this feedback loop and promote communication, open communication, and also reporting and the addressing. So promoting a multi-stakeholder participatory approach into these farm labor regulations and policies will help empower historically marginalized employees, but without the fear of repercussion. In addition, there's prioritizing work organization. So enforcing more inclusive work organization policies that'll help amplify these experiences of female migrant farm workers and also improving their occupational health outcomes. This means cultivating supportive and safe environments through improved ergonomic policies for migrant agricultural workers, especially women, will work to improve the working conditions of all workers in the long term. And finally, integrated pest management and digital health equity. Integrated pest management, or IPM, has been identified as a means to increase agricultural profits while also improving the living conditions and the working conditions of these women, but also reducing the risk of pesticide. And number two is digital health equity. This means improving health outcomes through accessibility to digital health tools like telemedicine, while also promoting health literacy in rural areas. So utilizing agro-technologies like IPM and digital health equity to institute more sustainable approaches to agriculture not only works to preserve the environment, but also promotes the social protection and inclusion of vulnerable populations like female farm workers. And while the results of this research provide insight into the lived experiences of farm workers upholding the food and agricultural system in North Carolina, the implications of this study can go far beyond North Carolina, as the protection of farm worker rights is a global issue and improvements in one geography can be applicable to others. If you have any further questions or comments, please feel free to contact me via the information on the screen. Thank you for your time.
Hello, everyone. My name is Leo Paxton, and I'm an accelerated bachelor's master's student at North Carolina State University. I've had the privilege of working under Melissa Dunn with WomenNC to develop this research question for you all. If rural counties focus on women's health care, will there be left? So brain drain is an issue that impacts local communities where educated individuals leave to pursue economic opportunities in generally urban areas. And so what communities often do is target economic incentives to address this problem. However, in rural North Carolina, there is a lack of public health support for women. And without that population and without targeting their needs, women are less likely to build their livelihoods in these rural communities. This urgent need to understand the public health support systems in rural North Carolina became my focus to understand whether public health support systems do support the needs of educated individuals with a bachelor's degree or higher. As you can see here, I used a combination of literature review and publicly available data to develop my paper. I looked at 5 randomly selected counties in North Carolina by their geographic region and a couple of the American community surveys. So gender diversity was found to increase financial returns by 15%. And women's health was an indicator for community health in rural areas. In North Carolina, rural counties had an average, a low average for women's health and wellness. And women were less likely to have attained a bachelor's degree or higher in these communities. Women who are educated are more likely to travel for specialized care. As a result, I recommended developing robust women's health programs for county health level departments to create accessible and attainable health for women. I would recommend incentivizing clinics so that they locate their operations within hotspots in rural areas, and outline health codes that allow women to have independent and personal health insurance. That is all I have for you today. If you have any questions, I Please feel free to ask me during the Q&A or reach out to me at my contact information.
Hi everyone, my name is Issa Vandergrift and I'm a former WomenNC scholar and a board member. And this is
Hello everyone, my name is Bridget and I am staff with WomenNC and I'm so we are very excited to move to our Q&A session for our first scholars. So if you all in the audience have questions for these first four presentations, now is the time where our scholars come up and they will have the floor to be able to answer your questions.
Does anyone have any questions? If not, we've got
My question is for our first speaker about the Kiran, that used to be a sister organization with Interact for the victims of domestic violence in Lake County. And I would like to see how I have been out of loop of Interact for a while. That how Kiran is working right now and how effective it is to have our local community.
Well, I would say that Karen right now has a smaller population of employees, and it's really hard for them to garner like increase in their outreach. And that's why I wanted to focus on research with outreaches in Wake County and to garner that outreach.
No, but Kiran was working for that population, the Asian community. They are still working on that.
Yeah, there's still a prominent organization, only organization in North Carolina, specifically South Asian.
Hi, I had a question for Allison. How much of your research, you said that schools and public schools focused on, was that just one school or two schools, or is that?
So based on my research, it was a district-wide initiative that the superintendent announced about 3 or 4 years ago. In terms of the progress they've made so far, based on the website that I was able to look at, they have hired a specifically designated restorative practice coordinator for each school there. And then when students otherwise would have been sent to a room for in-school suspension and just excluded from the classroom, they're instead kind of given time with the restorative practice coordinator. I've been in some conversation about how effective the program that really is. I think in some ways it does retain some of that same exclusion, like they're still leaving the classroom and it's still an implementation, but it's really a good start. And it's
I thought for me, what was really surprising was that, so I actually, one of the counties that I looked at had several women's health initiatives in their county level health departments. And what I was excited and so, happy to find was that the one that had these county level health initiatives that focused on women and not just maternal health, but also women's health needs as a whole, was the one that had the highest educational attainment and still maintained a median wage, which I thought was also surprising. You know, there was a confounder there, but that is something that I would also be interested in looking into a little bit further in my research career. But I just thought I would share that.
So my question is from Carolina about I know that you are a public policy student, and how do you see your research and recommendation impact the policy, make it different for workers?
So I think that one of the biggest barriers in this research is definitely the legal landscape with migrant workers working on H-2A visas, which is a seasonal visa that I go into more depth in my research. I think that one of the first steps in reframing a policy landscape is definitely with immigration policy and the kind of reforms with economic incentives, worker regulations. I think that it can start both the farm worker corporation level and then at a state level. I think that they go kind of hand in hand, both in the private sector and then also in the
something that yourself, you have a plan to reach out to elected officials, to share your findings, to ask for what is the advocacy aspect?
Yeah, so what I really enjoyed about my research through the topic has been finding the farm worker alliances that are a network of NGOs throughout the state. So my advocacy plan is to partner with them on areas of further research and then also public policy advocacy.
Here you have to
I can just give a brief answer to that. I think that one of the most important parts of my research is to amplify the voices and the lived experiences of historically marginalized populations. I think that that's one of the most important first steps into scaling research initiatives to first make sure that they have a platform, equitable initiatives so that they can speak about their lived experiences and injustices, but also within a system that we all.
I think I would echo a lot of what Carolina said. A part of my research that I have felt is missing from my experience with WomenNC so far is that I engaged in this literature review, but I've had very little opportunity to actually talk to teachers and administrators in the state of North Carolina. I'm an out-of-state student, so this is not my home, but it has become my home, and it's something I really care about. So over the course of the next few months, and as I kind of take this research and aim to put it into action, I think most important start is to start local and from the ground up and talk to students who are experiencing these practices in a harmful way, talk to teachers about their experiences starting to implement restorative justice and what barriers they have had. Because honestly, I've read about some, but I want to hear first would be useful for teachers to feel more empowered to make those decisions.
I would say, well, the first domestic violence symposium that's being hosted through a religious organization this Sunday through the Triangle Area Hindu Temple. And after that symposium, what I hope to do is share the lessons that learned in that symposium and resources with other religious organizations in Wake County to expand that education and outreach to those who practice their religion, such as Islam or Sikhism and various religions. I would just echo, I mean, those were amazing answers too. I would just really want to dig down and dig deep into local communities and understand what drives and what is personal to those local communities. And I think just by understanding that and having those conversations and communicating will help bring about these changes that we're asking for.
I think we have time for one more question. If anybody has one, and if not, we can. Thank you all so much. Great job. We're going to have a really quick intermission if you'd like to go grab some more food, and then we'll start back in a couple of minutes. In about 15 minutes. So feel free to go use the restroom, chat with our scholars we just presented, and we'll
have 4 more scholar presentations that we are going to hear today. And we are going to resume with Ms. Calandra.
My research on women's pregnancy centers in Wake County empowers young women with low health literacy and I'd like to start my presentation with 2 stories of patient experience. So these stories take place after each patient has visited a CPC website like the one on the screen. So the first patient is Jane, and she has an unintended pregnancy. She wishes to go to a place to get off the town. No, then they give her biased information that is medically inaccurate about abortion procedures, such as that they cause breast cancer and future reversal. They also insist on giving Jane an ultrasound and using terms like baby and mom in ultrasound. And Jane ends up leaving this pregnancy center feeling more confused and scared than when she came. Our second patient, Clara, has been trying to get pregnant for over a year and is currently 3 months pregnant and is looking for a place for a free ultrasound because she can't afford to do prenatal tests. And when she goes to the CPC, everyone is enthusiastic about her pregnancy. However, when the volunteer who's running the ultrasound says that she can't find the baby, panics and goes to the hospital. The actual ultrasound technician does another ultrasound and everything is fine, you're still pregnant, you know, kind of the CPC must have misinterpreted the ultrasound. So these stories are just too many that unfold after women visit CPC. And reading about them inspired me to dig further into how these organizations operate without regulations. So my research consisted of 4 parts: a literature review, law analysis, and a website content analysis. And together they helped me create recommendations for change. So my first part of my research was a literature review. And my main finding was that from the literature review was that CPCs engaged in many unethical practices. However, laws attempting to regulate their misinformation are struck down on the grounds of protecting the free speech of students. The literature review also helped me define what exactly a CPC is. So in 2021, Texas pregnancy centers outnumbered abortion providers in the US 3-to-1. However, this number has probably risen even more with the fall of Roe and the strict anti-abortion legislations enacted in many states. So basically, in short, CPCs are unlicensed health centers that provide free pregnancy testing and ultrasounds. But they also give patients biased and inaccurate information, especially on topics of contraception. So the second part of my research was a law review of laws proposed in the NC legislature right after the fall. And all these laws related to abortion. So there were 7 proposed bills, and 4 were made to limit abortion access, and 3 were to protect abortion access. One of the most notable laws proposed wanted to require physicians to endorse abortion reversal procedures, which are actually medically unproven and not safe. So the third part of my research was a CPC website content review. And this was to determine what misinformation CPCs in Wake County did.
And actually, when I started my research, there were only 6 CPCs in Wake County. Unfortunately, now there are 7. So the biggest finding I had was that the North Carolina legislature protects and funds CPCs while trying to restrict access to abortion services. So CPCs in Wake County engage in many unethical practices, such as spreading misinformation about abortion and contraception. As you can see in the bottom box, all of the CPCs in Wake County engage in those kinds of mistakes. Additionally, CPCs in Wake County, 50% of them are actually in the NCDHHS Pregnancy Resource Directory. And while they do provide pregnancy testing and ultrasounds, they fail to provide vital services such as contraception and abortion referrals. So we know that CPCs aren't exactly great. So what can we do to fix it? My first solution would be to add more comprehensive resources to the NCDHHS Pregnancy Resource Directory. Because currently it does not include abortion clinics or private comprehensive health clinics. So by including those options, we'll be creating a more unbiased resource from the state. My second proposed solution goes back to the 2 stories from the beginning. Both Clara and Jane would have had a better experience with CPCs if they weren't allowed to use ultrasound with untrained volunteers. Clara wouldn't have thought that she'd had a miscarriage mistakenly, and Jane wouldn't have been manipulated. So my proposed solution for this would be to require sonographers in North Carolina to be licensed or certified and just standardize the procedure where unlicensed people would at least have to display that they were not licensed. So thank you for your time.
Good evening. I am Talia Chavis. I'm a 3rd year public health education student at North Carolina Central University. First, I want to thank WomenNC for their continued support throughout this research journey. Specifically, I want to thank my mentor, Ms. Ann Landarella, for her guidance and her patience. My topic addresses health disparities in Black women in leadership. First, I want to start by saying that healthcare is the cornerstone of society. Everyone is entitled to healthcare. It is a basic human right. However, according to the Healthy North Carolina 2030 report, it clearly states that structural racism is the root cause to healthcare disparities in populations of color. This includes public policy, institutional practices, and social norms. The racial wealth gap was created by the Federal Housing Authority. This put Black people in the category of being high risk in regard to paying mortgages for homes and the start of rent money. Unlike their white counterparts, they could not purchase homes in healthy communities, get jobs that pay a fair wage, or obtain a decent education. So these 4 causes of death. For these, the death rate for Blacks is higher than it is for whites. Also, Black women hold the most hazardous occupations in healthcare. More often than not, Black women in healthcare serve as certified nursing assistants or home health aides, which all fall under the umbrella of long-term care. These jobs earn a low wage and have minimal benefits. Historically, slavery placed most Black women in domestic roles. And in 2019, the Census Bureau found that on average, the median Black household income was $43,000, while the average white median household income was $71,000. There's a lack of Black women in leadership positions in healthcare, which is evident by the picture. Between 2011 and 2015, minority representation in these roles remain under 20%. And with this statistic, men and women are included, and also every minority group is included. One of the biggest health issues faced by the Black community is maternal mortality rate. No matter what their socioeconomic status is, Black women still fare worse than any other racial group. So Serena Williams, a world-renowned tennis icon, shared the story of the delivery of her daughter. She was not heard by her medical team. A simple look at her medical history would have indicated that she had a high risk of blood loss. If she had not advocated for herself and forced her medical team to give her a test for blood clots, she would have suffered a pulmonary embolism and not been able to see her beautiful daughter grow up. For my methodology, I conducted a literature review that composed of 26 references in total, but I chose to use 7 peer review. For my findings, I found that there are many barriers that Black women face in the work. One of the biggest being stereotypes. Some of the stereotypes that were talked about were that Black women are the mad Black woman, the self-sacrificing nanny, or the bossy independent Black woman. Also, other words were used, such as aggressive, combative, or not being a team player. The media has added fuel to the fire because they broadcast Black women to fit these stereotypes. This is not realistic. A lack of mentors is unique because there are already so few African American women in these roles. So who will be able to coach the next generation of Black women who want to be leaders in healthcare? And lastly, for advancement opportunities, white men have always had multiple seats at the table, and they do not view women or minorities as being capable of executive leadership. Women in general are overlooked for advancement opportunities. However, Black women face the concrete ceiling of their race and their gender. Many do not know where to turn when they're feeling isolated or having their every move questioned. So in taking a look at North Carolina, I decided to focus on the triangle, which includes UNC Health, Duke Health, and Wake Health. I found that UNC Health, their CEO is a white man, and I also included a picture of their African American female demographic. There was only one. For Duke, their representation is a better example of what we should be aiming for. So out of all of the healthcare systems in North Carolina, only one was actually led by an African American female. And I also took a look at Wake Med, and there are only 2 minorities, and the only 2 minorities happen to be African American female. Also, the Healthy North Carolina 2030 report showed that lower income families had a greater chance of living in communities with schools that didn't have enough resources to their needs. Also, I found that the North Carolina Healthcare Association created the Diverse Healthcare Leaders Mentorship Program in 2019. This program will help share knowledge and experience with outstanding leaders in underrepresented communities, while also fostering professional development, networking, and mentorship, all of which are tools to being great leaders, and are also tools to navigating corporate America. With my findings, I came up with these recommendations. Increasing scholarships and grants to target Black women who are furthering their education in healthcare, creating more mentorship programs that help Black women navigate their careers, and also expanding opportunities to gain experience in healthcare administration while completing their careers. This can be through internships and other experiential learning. Thank you all for your time. If you have any questions or comments, I have my contact details on the slide. Thank you for your attention.
Hey everyone, thanks for being here tonight and sticking with it to the end. My name is Restorative. I am a senior at Duke University. And to start off, I wanted to thank everyone at WomenNC and especially my mentor, Dr. Kathy Bass, for supporting this research. My research has been looking at the best ways to support single mother students who are attending community colleges in the Triangle area, overcome barriers to meeting their educational goals. I personally was raised by a single mother who I saw go in and out of school throughout my life. It's a very personal project for me. As I've grown up, I've realized that a lot of the barriers that she faced were not only systemic, but fixable. And so this project is really for her and all single mothers out there who are looking to support their families. To give some context for this issue, there are a lot of single mother students in the United States, but not a lot of single mother students are graduating. Nearly 10% of all U.S. undergraduate students in the United States are single mothers. However, and this is a figure that continues to rise every year. However, only 33% of post-secondary students who have children are expected to graduate within 6 years of their enrollment. 28% of single mothers have some college education but no degree, making them more likely than all other women to have started but not finished their post-secondary degree. And only 30% of single mothers in the United States have earned a degree at the associate level or higher. This is an important issue because these women getting their degrees not only has significant positive impacts on their families and themselves, but also on state and national economies. Getting a college degree leads to immediate improvements in quality of life for single mothers and their families. 9 in 10 single mothers who are pursuing a college degree have incomes at or near the federal poverty line. Every additional level of education attained by a single mother is associated with a lower poverty rate. Additionally, the children of single mothers who have earned the degree are significantly more likely to go on and earn degrees of their own. Beyond that, researchers found that the cohort of single mothers who were enrolled in college during a single academic year, when compared to single mothers with only high school credentials, were expected to contribute over $6 billion more in taxes over their lifetime and save almost $20 billion in public assistance. But the main reason that we here in this room should care about this issue is because this is a fixable problem. As these researchers found, the predictors of success among single parent students are not invariant personal characteristics, but rather appear to be behaviors well within the influence of programs that can be created by institutions, nonprofits, scholarship funders, and more. Probably a lot of you in this room. That said, my project has been to find what programs we here in North Carolina can implement to best support the single mother students in our state. To do this, I conducted an action-oriented literature review with the goal of identifying both common barriers that single mothers face while attending community colleges and existing programs that have been implemented or at least proposed in other regions to combat those barriers. Across the literature in my review, there were a few challenges that were common to single mother students nationwide. These were financial constraints, including access to applying to and accessing student financial aid, time constraints when balancing family life with jobs and schoolwork, lacking access to affordable and high quality childcare, and lacking a sense of community and belonging on their campuses. In recent years, there has been a greater push from institutions to support student parents. Most often, these supports have taken the form of specific financial aid sources, including scholarships and guaranteed basic income programs specifically targeted at single parent students, offering on-campus childcare and/or childcare subsidies, and implementing specialized community supports on campus, and piloting data tracking efforts that are meant to identify the existence of this often overlooked student population on campus. Something that was really important to me in developing my recommendations was being thoughtful and intentional at the implementation of solutions, rather than putting a Band-Aid over a bullet hole. As these researchers identified, single units targeted at single parent students, including So the example that I was thinking of is having a child care center on campus without any other additional support. This counts the complex identity of the student parents and the importance of addressing their needs holistically. With that said, my recommendations for Triangle Area Community Colleges are components of a holistic initiative to best support single mother students. These include piloting a data collection program targeted at identifying the existence of single mother students on campuses, establishing a guaranteed income pilot, school-based guaranteed income pilot for single mother students, making improvements to existing child care programs, and hiring single mother navigators specifically trained to support single mothers in their complex needs. Thank you again for being here tonight. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me or in the Q&A after this.
Hello, and thank you all for being here today. Thank you to WomenNC and to my amazing mentor, Crystal, who's back there. My name is Mia Miranda, and I am a senior at Duke. I study psychology and English. And I would not be here today if it were not for the Latina immigrants that raised me. It shaped the way I view the world, and it shaped how I view myself. And it also meant that I quite intimately know the issues that the community faces. So in my research, I aim to explore one of these issues, which are the sexual and reproductive health issues faced by Latina immigrants, specifically in Durham, and what can be done not only to increase positive health outcomes, but to empower and work with this community. More precisely, I wanted to focus on how we can increase reproductive health literacy. So some background, Durham County has one of the largest Latino communities in North Carolina, with a population of about 45,000. Of this population, about 8,700 are Latina immigrant adult women. This group meets unique challenges due to the intersection of their race, sex, and migration status, along with socioeconomic and cultural factors that are unique to this community. And one of these pressing issues is sexual and reproductive health, where Latinos face a multitude of inequalities and negative health outcomes due to systemic barriers in receiving SRH services and comprehensive SRH education. In order to increase positive SRH outcomes, women must not only have access to tools and knowledge, but understand how to use these tools, especially within their sociocultural context, which is why I wanted to focus on health literacy other than just sex education, because literacy has to know with having the knowledge and also knowing how to implement the knowledge. So to learn more about SRH outcomes and health literacy, I conducted an action-oriented literature review. My approach was community-centered, orienting both my research and consequent recommendations in the Latina immigrant community. I also focused on adult immigrant women rather than adolescents, because most research on sex education and sex literacy has to do with adolescents. So I wanted to address this gap. And also a lot of the immigrants in Durham are adults. So findings from my literature review reveal that Latina women are disproportionately at risk for poor SRH outcomes. So these inequalities are even more stark for Latina immigrants, and especially those who are undocumented. So rates of HIV are 4 times higher for Latinas than for white women, and rates of other STIs are more than double. Across all races and ethnic groups, Latino women have the highest rates of developing cervical cancer, as you can see here, and the second highest mortality rates. In Durham, Latinas have significantly higher rates of pregnancy and infant mortality than other races and ethnicities, and Latina immigrants are also at an increased risk for unplanned pregnancies, reproductive coercion, intimate partner violence, and sexual trauma. The literature also found that Latina immigrants have a significantly higher number of misconceptions about pregnancy risk than any other group. Latinos have limited health-related knowledge, including knowledge about SRH services, STDs, and pregnancy prevention. Findings also show a connection between health literacy and health outcomes. For example, women with low levels of health literacy were 4 times more likely not to know when a woman could get pregnant during her menstrual cycle. SRH literacy is also associated with prenatal vitamin use, breastfeeding, postpartum depression,
contraception use, and unplanned pregnancies. Some of the factors contributing to low health literacy in Latina immigrants are language barriers, misogyny or machismo, immigration status, sociocultural beliefs, and stigma. My review culminated in a bunch of important aspects that would be effective in SRH literacy programs. So they must be interactive and community-centered, comprehensive, rooted in feminist theory, and expanding to encompass such topics such as like bodily autonomy and empowerment, and caters to specific obstacles that these immigrants are facing, specifically those who are undocumented, and be available in a hybrid format that allows women to choose a program that best fits their needs. One existing program in North Carolina is Leaders in Reproductive Justice at El Pueblo, which is a nonprofit in Wake County. They have an SRH education program that covers reproductive justice, rights, autonomy, contraception, and such topics as that. In Durham, we have a Centro Hispano, which works to strengthen and advocate the Latino community. Leadership informed me that they're currently working on developing a women's initiative and a support group, and they were open to hearing ideas about introducing sexual health literacy into the support group. Additionally, Durham Public Health offers women's health services like a maternal health clinic, family planning program, and breast and cervical cancers. So taking the current services that are available into account, as well as the information gathered in my literature review, I proposed the two following solutions, recommendations. So one is that Durham Public Health work with its Centro Hispano to create a sexual and reproductive health literacy program. So this program would integrate SRH health literacy education with a women's community group at a centro using evidence-based feminist curriculum, and that promotes community building and having Latinas teach this as community health workers to other Latinas. So you're not having people from outside the community come in and try to teach the community, working on women's empowerment and comprehensive health education. And my second recommendation is that Durham County provide funding to the public health department for this initiative and providing transportation and childcare to the women participating in the program, expanding their health services, and providing educational materials in Spanish that tell women not just where to get services, but what they can expect specifically if they are adopted. Thank you.
Yay! Another round of applause for my So now we will move into our discussion. So to get started, does anybody in the audience have any questions? Yes.
Yes, great presentations everybody has done. This is for, I hope I pronounced Kalia? Yeah. So the CPCs, as you mentioned, the state of North Carolina funds these with thousands and thousands of dollars in the budget. Yeah. So how would you propose that this information be given to legislators who continue to vote for this type of funding, these very inaccurate and harmful CPCs? I mean, what would you propose and how would you propose that this be done? Ideally.
So for CPCs, it would definitely be hard to talk to them in a way that they might listen. However, I think just like trying to calmly explain, especially reproductive things, such as can do different services that actually improve maternal mortality rates or improve or decrease unplanned pregnancies via contraceptive services. Don't necessarily give the information as submitted by actual.
Most of the problems that you are making research here relates to Durham or North Carolina farmers, health issues, and other things. Therefore, what is the purpose of your trip to New York? What do you want to do with this project in New York? In a week's time, you are going to spend in New York. What is the purpose of the trip? Besides, if there are other NGOs coming from other countries, sitting for your project, listening to you, the structure of their society has no resemblance to Durham or other organizations here. Therefore, how are they going to apply your research or replicate your research into their own problems over in other countries? It's a general question. Anybody can answer it. Even those four scholars sitting on that side can answer that question.
Are mainly endemic to the United States, so it would really be more about saying, oh, we don't want to let our own societies end up funding organizations. It would almost be like a cautionary virus. Points of what we've learned in our society and then trying to find a way to implement them into other societies.
This might be kind of a simplistic answer, but I would say that so much of the research that I was doing was looking at solutions that have been implemented in other regions, and even some were not specifically for single-parent students or not specifically for community colleges. Like the Universal Basic Income Program that I recommended was kind of based off of an article that I was reading about there's one in Durham. But nationwide, there have been some implemented for people who are coming back into society after being incarcerated, or really just a lot of different programs. And I think what that taught me was just that, I guess, the value of listening to other people and seeing what they're doing, because there are so many solutions out there that just aren't here. And so, I mean, obviously, I wouldn't necessarily say that the educational system for women is the same worldwide, but I do think that the disparity of women being educated is a global problem. And so hearing how other people are approaching these solutions is definitely something that I found of value just in my small little niche project on a global scale that's very applicable.
I was just going to say, similar to what you said, I think sexual reproductive health, which a lot of us touched on in our projects, is something that women have lack of access to in every single, most countries in the world. Specifically, as I was talking about migrant women, I talked about Latinos because this is a big migrant group in Durham specifically, but every country has these big migrant groups that are facing like these barriers to access because they don't have the language, they don't know the systems, and because they're discriminated against. So I think it's something that's applicable to other countries, though they do have different groups of people there. These are still issues that they're facing. To be helpful.
I think I want to add one more thing. I'm sorry. You know, I think in probably most of the problems, single mother, college with child, you know, there is a problem here. They have to figure out a solution. Probably in Afghanistan, they are not going to have this problem because the girls are not going to school and they are not going to college. Therefore, they are not going to have that problem, right?
So first of all, you guys did a fantastic job, all of you. And I am sure you made WomenNC and WomenNC delegate at the United Nations proud. Then we go there and you present. But you will be amazed at how important it is for the audience in the United Nations to listen to your research, especially because your research is associated with the solution. You are not just bringing the problems to the table. You have some solution that you offer. Your presentation for the NGOs who are participating in our event has two important impacts. One is people from all over the world, they understand that in the United States, we don't have a rose garden. Still, we have problems. The second part of it is that they learn from your solution. They see your leadership role in your community. So you live in the United States, someone lives in Afghanistan, someone lives in Iran, people are scattered all over the world. But the most important is that we play our role as a leader. And WomenNC's leadership, youth leadership program is very unique because of this, because it opens the door for undergraduate students to play a leadership role. And you are doing a beautiful job, and you will be amazed at how people welcome you at the United Nations. Whenever you raise your hand, they give the microphone to you to ask questions. Because they really welcome the presence of young people at the United Nations. It's great. Thank you.
This is a question for teaching. Can you tell us how did you learn from this?
I'll just say a lot of the work I do in school and a lot of my interests focus around like feminist theory and feminist curriculum. So it was actually really nice to hear like from the past interventions that have been done. And I looked at interventions that have been done with Latinas and also interventions that have been done with Black women in prisons and different interventions that have been done to try to increase sexual and reproductive health literacy, that all of these did better when they were rooted in feminist theory compared to ones that didn't have this. So what they're just giving you the information and not talking about empowerment and bodily autonomy and things like that. They weren't doing as well and the women weren't learning as much because they just they didn't feel empowered enough to actually put this into play. So I thought like just based on my interest and what I have always like loved, which is feminist theory, I found that really positive to hear that that is something that is beneficial for women to learn and that it can be done and has been done before, like and Pueblo at Wake County, that its centro was interested in hearing my ideas and implementing that.
Sure. Well, I know you know this intimately, but I would say on a local level, something that was really encouraging to know was that really just even throughout the time that I was doing this research, there was all these news briefings coming out about Governor Cooper putting more funding into community colleges, and kind of that shaped a lot of my recommendations because I was very encouraged by the fact that like, okay, we have this money, this is clearly becoming a bigger initiative and people are paying more attention to this issue. So how do we spend that money in a way that's going to actually be effective? And so that was definitely a lot more empowering and feeling like, oh, this is an issue that people are paying attention to, and it's not just those things that you kind of have an existential crisis, like, oh, what do we do about that? So that was definitely empowering. But also, well, of course, like even with the topic of my project, I don't want to profess the, that going to college is going to, save everyone's problems. I do think that it was really empowering to find that going to college did have these like immediate positive impacts on single mothers and their families. And also that quote that I emphasized a lot about the fact that this is a fixable problem and that a lot of the barriers that single mothers are facing in colleges are things that are within the influence of people who have power. And as long as we continue to have a conversation and build advocacy towards actually making those changes, this is something that hopefully will not be a problem forever.
I'll say with my project, it's personal to me because I want to be a healthcare administrator because I see a need in my community for representation, and only recently has race been considered not as taboo as it was previously. So I think having the hard conversations about putting more African American women in leadership roles, that is powerful. One positive thing that I did see throughout this process was that, well, it's somewhat of a bittersweet thing, but there wasn't much research that was done on implementing or putting more Black women in leadership roles in healthcare. So that kind of inspired my belly to continue with my research.
Research definitely made me mad at times because of how much the state was actually endorsing. But one of the most empowering things for me, that in my North Carolina law review, there were also almost as many proposed bills like trying to protect bodily autonomy as those that were trying to use it, and then also that there was higher visibility of the misinformation being spread by crisis pregnancy centers in the last like 5 years or so, especially, which means that there are more organizations actively denouncing them. No, this isn't okay. You can find some of their protections. Here for contact information if you're interested in reaching out.
Hi. Aren't our scholars amazing? Did you all walk in here thinking you had learned so much? Amazing, amazing, amazing. As Lisa said, please take your phones out right now. If you have a LinkedIn, I want you to scan their QR codes and please just add them to your LinkedIn account. They would love to stay in contact with you all to really talk more about their research and enhance the work that they're doing. So I just want to quickly, you have 5 more minutes, we're going to close this out. WomenNC is 100% committed to empowering the next generation to advance gender equity in North Carolina. We have developed 70 scholars across 8 colleges and universities over the past several years. That's worth a clap. We have reached over 25,000 change agents, including legislators, policymakers, and community leaders. We've helped to create sustainable mechanisms for gender equity in Durham County and the city by evaluating programs and budgets for gender disparities. We've established methods to eliminate gender disparities in high schools, computer science classes in Durham County. There's just so much work that this program does every day. And I'm really passionate about our organization and the work that we do to really engage and create our future diverse, amazing women leaders of America. And so I want to make a plea, ultimately. You know, and WomenNC does a lot of work with a very small budget annually. And so I would be remiss if I did not ask you all to support our organization. Every donation counts. Whatever you can give, we are grateful for. And so, yeah, and we're going to make it easy for you. Bam. There's a QR code right there that will take you right to our website for you to give to WomenNC. Last but certainly not least, I would like to thank a few people. So first, thank you to Dr. Wendy Wexberg. She's on Zoom. Hi, Wendy. She's the director of our RTI Global Gender Center, and she's the past president of WomenNC. The RTI Global Gender Center provides all of our femtors that have spent countless hours working closely with all of our scholars to develop their research papers. Our scholars and the board of directors are so very grateful for the commitment from our RTI WomenNC femtors and the RTI Global Center. So thank you very much. Special shout out to our WomenNC staff. Ava, Bridget, please come really quick. I don't want to get in, but these 2 young women really keep the wheel moving on WomenNC and the organization. I mean, I am nothing without them too, and I say that very humbly. They're always there when I need them, when the organization needs them, and I'm so appreciative for their hard work and dedication to this organization. I wanted to really just recognize them publicly so that they know how amazing I think they are. So thank you. shout out to our board of directors who's always ready and willing to jump in and fill in any gaps where needed. Thank you for working beside me as we maneuver and look towards the future of WomenNC. So if our board of directors can quickly stand if you're here today. Shout out to the amazing Lisa. Lisa isn't a WomenNC staff member, but she might as well be. She really supports us so much. So thank you so much, Lisa. Last but certainly not least, I have to shout out Beth Egan. Beth is the founder of WomenNC, and without her vision and passion, we would not be here today. So Beth, if you could please stand really quickly. And so thank you all so much for coming out and supporting our mentors, of course, not our mentors, supporting our scholars. It's been an amazing event. We appreciate your time and attention, and we look forward to next year. Please feel free to, again, support us at any way that you can, and we're grateful.